What if the world you knew simply forgot how to stop raining? Imagine waking up every single day beneath a sky so dark and endless that sunlight becomes a fading memory. Imagine hearing rain every second of your life. On stone, on trees, on oceans, on the bones of creatures trying to survive. Not for days, not for years, but for 2 million years. And what if ancient civilizations remembered it? What if stories about the Great Flood, the gods descending from the heavens, and the mysterious beings later called the Anunnaki were not myths at all, but fragmented memories from a catastrophe so old it predates human history itself? Tonight, we travel back more than 230 million years into one of the strangest chapters in Earth's history. A time when the entire planet transformed from a burning desert into a drowned world of endless storms. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. Turn down the lights, relax, and let the sound of the ancient rain carry you into the distant past. Long before humans existed, before mammals ruled the earth, before the rise of the great dinosaurs, the world looked nothing like the planet we know today. All land on Earth was fused into a single supercontinent, Pangaea, a colossal mass of rock and desert stretching from pole to pole like a wound across the surface of the planet. The center of this supercontinent was so far from any ocean that moisture rarely reached it. Clouds were almost unknown here. Rainfall was so rare that entire generations of creatures could live and die without seeing more than a few brief storms. The interior of Pangaea was one of the harshest environments Earth had ever produced. Daytime temperatures scorched the land with unbearable heat. At night, the same deserts froze beneath black skies filled with unfamiliar stars. Wind carved the stone endlessly, shaping vast canyons and endless dunes that stretched farther than the eye could see. There were no forests here, no rivers, no green valleys, only silence. A dry, endless silence broken occasionally by the hiss of sand moving across rock. Life survived, but barely. The plants of this world were specialists in suffering. Primitive conifers and ancient ferns clung to existence using bizarre adaptations. Some developed wax-covered surfaces to trap every molecule of moisture. Others spread roots horizontally across enormous distances, searching desperately for hidden groundwater buried deep beneath the surface. Certain species could remain dormant for decades, waiting for rainfall that might never come. The animals were equally extreme. Reptiles dominated the land because they alone could tolerate the brutal dryness. Their thick-scaled skin trapped precious water inside their bodies like living armor. Strange mammal-like reptiles called therapsids wandered between scattered water sources, competing viciously for survival. Every oasis became a battlefield, and among these creatures moved something small, fast, and mostly unnoticed. Primitive archosaurs, early relatives of the dinosaurs. At this point in history, they were insignificant. Small predators and scavengers living at the edges of ecosystems dominated by much larger reptiles. Nothing about them suggested they would someday rule the planet, but evolution often hides its future kings in the shadows. The skies above Pangaea almost never changed. For millions of years, the heavens remained brutally blue from horizon to horizon. Clouds became so rare that animals instinctively reacted whenever they appeared. Entire groups of reptiles gathered in dry riverbeds at the faintest sign of moisture, hoping to catch a few drops from weak passing storms. But the rain never lasted. The clouds always disappeared, and the deserts always returned. The rivers of this ancient world existed mostly as scars. Dry channels cut across the continents, reminders of wetter ages long forgotten. Occasionally, sudden storms transformed these dead rivers into violent torrents for a few hours or days, but soon the water vanished once again into the endless heat. Even the oceans were strange. The seas surrounding Pangaea were unnaturally warm. Massive evaporation pulled huge quantities of water into the atmosphere, but almost none of it reached the interior deserts. It was as if Earth itself had become trapped in a broken climate system. Water existed, but only in the wrong places. Still, beneath this seemingly stable world, something enormous was beginning. Far beyond the deserts of Pangaea, near what would someday become Alaska and western Canada, the crust of the Earth was slowly tearing open. Deep below the oceans, giant volcanic systems awakened. At first, the changes were subtle, minor earthquakes, hot gases rising from underwater cracks, unusual warming in surrounding seas. Marine animals began behaving strangely. Fish abandoned their migration routes. Coral systems showed signs of stress. Entire ecosystems shifted without any obvious cause. No creature on Earth could understand what was coming, because the planet itself was preparing for war against its own climate, and somewhere far beyond human memory, beyond written history, beyond civilization itself. Some believe the beings later remembered as the Anunnaki may have witnessed the beginning of this transformation. Ancient Mesopotamian legends spoke of gods descending from the heavens before a great flood changed the world. Most historians dismiss these stories as mythology, but myths are often born from fragments of truth, and Earth was about to experience a flood unlike anything in its entire history. Not a flood lasting 40 days, not a flood lasting centuries, but rain that would continue for 2 million years. The first eruptions began beneath the ocean. No witnesses stood nearby to see them. No eyes watched the sea floor crack apart as magma forced its way upward through ancient fractures in Earth's crust. But the consequences of those eruptions would eventually reach every corner of the planet. The region modern geologists call Rangelia was not yet part of North America. More than 230 million years ago, it existed as a gigantic volcanic province drifting through tropical seas far from the center of Pangaea. At first, the eruptions seemed insignificant on a planetary scale. Small bursts of lava, columns of steam rising from underwater vents, earthquakes rolling silently beneath the oceans. But beneath the surface, pressure continued building. Magma chambers larger than entire modern countries expanded kilometer by kilometer below the crust. The deeper they grew, the more unstable the region became. Then the planet crossed a threshold. The eruptions no longer came as isolated explosions. They became continuous. Entire mountains split apart. Lava poured across the seafloor for decades without stopping. New volcanic islands rose from the ocean only to collapse back beneath the waves during the next eruption cycle. The amount of material released into the atmosphere was beyond anything humans have ever witnessed. Modern volcanic eruptions like Krakatoa or Mount St. Helens would have seemed microscopic in comparison. Rangelia was releasing enough lava to bury entire continents. But lava was not the true danger. The real catastrophe was invisible. Carbon dioxide. Trillions upon trillions of tons of it. Locked deep inside Earth for millions of years, now violently expelled into the atmosphere. Every eruption released enormous clouds of greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide mixed with sulfur compounds, chlorine, and massive quantities of water vapor. The atmosphere itself began changing chemistry. At first, the warming was gradual, almost unnoticeable. Global temperatures rose by fractions of a degree over centuries. But Earth's climate system is delicate. Small changes often trigger enormous consequences. The oceans responded first. Warmer seas evaporated more water into the atmosphere. More moisture created stronger greenhouse effects. Stronger greenhouse effects trapped even more heat. A feedback loop had begun. The planet was now heating itself. Across Pangaea, ancient ecosystems slowly started to break apart. The nights changed before the days did. For millions of years, desert temperatures had dropped sharply after sunset, allowing plants and animals brief relief from daytime heat. But now, the nights remained warm. The heat lingered. Stone radiated warmth long after sunset. The air became heavier, more humid. The deserts could feel the planet changing before they could see it. Primitive reptiles wandered farther at night, searching for water that no longer behaved according to ancient patterns. Dry riverbeds filled unexpectedly after distant storms. Seasonal winds shifted directions. Something was wrong with the sky. The oceans were changing too. As carbon dioxide dissolved into seawater, it altered the chemistry of entire marine ecosystems. Ancient reefs began weakening. Creatures that built shells from calcium carbonate suddenly struggled to survive in increasingly acidic oceans. Many species could not adapt fast enough. The first silent extinctions had already begun. And still, the volcanoes continued. Year after year. Century after century. The atmosphere thickened with greenhouse gases until Earth itself started trapping heat with terrifying efficiency. Modern scientists believe carbon dioxide levels may have doubled during this period. To understand how extreme this was, imagine all industrial pollution produced by human civilization since the Industrial Revolution, and then multiply it beyond comprehension. The Earth was no longer operating under normal climate rules. Something ancient and unstable was waking up inside the atmosphere. Massive storm systems began forming over the oceans, not ordinary storms. Planet-sized weather systems fed by overheated seas and enormous atmospheric moisture. At first, they remained near coastlines. The interior of Pangaea still resisted change. The deserts had dominated for millions of years. Dry air continued pushing moisture away from the continent's center like an invisible shield. But the shield was weakening, slowly, relentlessly. In the equatorial regions of the supercontinent, clouds began surviving longer than they should have. Normally, ancient desert heat would destroy them by midday. But now the atmosphere contained too much moisture, too much trapped warmth. The clouds no longer vanished. They grew. Towering black formations stretched across the sky like mountains made of vapor. Their shadows rolled across deserts that had not seen shade in geological ages. Animals panicked. Entire herds gathered beneath these strange, moving shadows, driven by instincts they barely understood. Reptiles lifted their heads toward the darkening sky. Primitive archosaurs changed migration patterns. Predators became restless. The planet itself felt unfamiliar. And then came the humidity. For creatures adapted to dry air, the moisture was suffocating. Breathing became harder. The atmosphere felt heavier, thicker, almost alive. Ancient plants that had evolved to preserve every drop of water suddenly found themselves surrounded by moisture they could not process. Some species began rotting from within, their root systems drowned in soil that no longer dried properly. Meanwhile, other plants, species that had survived only in isolated wet environments, suddenly began spreading outward. The balance of life was shifting. And somewhere in the deep future of human memory, flood myths would one day emerge in nearly every civilization on Earth. The Sumerians would speak of divine beings warning humanity before a great flood. The Babylonians would preserve stories of gods watching civilization drown beneath endless rain. Thousands of years later, many would dismiss these legends as symbolic tales. But perhaps the story survived because Earth really had once entered an age when the rain never stopped. Perhaps ancient memory preserves disasters far older than humanity itself, because now, above the burning deserts of Pangaea, the first true storm clouds in millions of years were gathering, and soon the sky would finally break. At first, nobody understood what they were seeing. The creatures of Pangaea had evolved beneath open skies for millions of years. Clouds were rare enough to feel unnatural. Entire ecosystems had been built around the assumption that the heavens would always remain empty. But now the sky itself was changing. Above the endless deserts, towering walls of dark vapor stretched from horizon to horizon. Not thin streaks of moisture that vanished within hours, but massive atmospheric structures that continued growing day after day. For the first time in geological ages, sunlight began disappearing for long periods. Shadows moved across landscapes that had not known darkness outside of nightfall. The temperature dropped, not because winter had arrived, but because the clouds refused to leave. Warm ocean air, overloaded with moisture from overheated seas, now pushed deep into the interior of Pangaea. Atmospheric circulation patterns that had remained stable for millions of years suddenly collapsed into chaos. The dry world was losing control of its own climate. The first storms formed near the equator. Primitive thunderheads rose higher into the atmosphere than any clouds Earth had produced in ages. Their upper layers froze into colossal anvils of ice, while their lower regions churned with boiling moisture and electrical energy. Lightning flashed continuously inside them, not occasional strikes. Entire systems of constant electrical discharge illuminating the clouds from within like living organisms. The sound terrified everything. Thunder rolled across the deserts for hours at a time, echoing through canyons and dry river valleys. Creatures that had evolved in near silence suddenly found themselves trapped beneath skies that screamed without warning. Some fled instinctively. Others froze in place, unable to process the unfamiliar noise. The storms grew larger, more violent, and then, somewhere above the center of Pangaea, the impossible finally happened. Rain began to fall. At first it was weak, scattered droplets drifting downward through layers of hot, dry air. Most evaporated before reaching the surface, but not all of them. One drop survived, then another, then hundreds more. Tiny dark spots appeared on the ancient desert floor before vanishing almost instantly beneath the heat. For the first time in millions of years, liquid water had touched the heart of Pangaea. The smell came next. Petrichor, the scent of rain striking dry earth. A smell so ancient that no living creature on Earth had experienced it in evolutionary memory. The ground released oils and minerals that had remained trapped beneath the surface for geological ages. The air filled with a strange scent, whetstone, dust, minerals, life itself awakening from dormancy. Animals reacted immediately. Reptiles emerged cautiously from rock shelters. Primitive archosaurs lifted their heads toward the dark sky. Herds gathered instinctively around the falling droplets. Some creatures drank directly from the ground. Others panicked and fled. The storm intensified. Within hours, the isolated drops became steady rainfall. The sky darkened further as more moisture surged inland from the oceans. Warm air rose rapidly into the upper atmosphere, feeding the storm systems with endless energy. And something extraordinary happened. The rain did not stop. Day turned into night beneath thick cloud cover. The first streams formed in ancient dry riverbeds, carrying muddy water through valleys that had remained empty for millions of years. The deserts resisted at first. The ground was too hard to absorb moisture properly after such extreme dehydration. Water spread across the surface instead, gathering in shallow pools and temporary floods. But the atmosphere kept feeding the storms. Hour after hour, day after day, rain continued falling. Ancient plants began responding immediately. Dormant spores buried beneath the desert surface suddenly activated. Tiny green shoots emerged from soil that had seemed permanently dead. For a brief moment, parts of Pangaea exploded with life. But the transformation soon became terrifying. The rainfall increased beyond anything these ecosystems could tolerate. Primitive conifers adapted for drought started drowning in oversaturated soil. Their roots rotted beneath the surface. Thick wax coatings that once preserved water now trapped excess moisture against their tissues, causing fungal infections and decay. Entire forests died standing. The reptiles suffered too. Species adapted for water conservation suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by endless humidity. Their efficient kidneys and moisture-retaining bodies became liabilities in the new world. Skin diseases spread rapidly. Fungal infections appeared. Eggs failed to develop properly in constantly wet conditions. The old rulers of the dry world were beginning to collapse. Meanwhile, other creatures thrived. Small archosaurs moved easily through muddy terrain where larger reptiles struggled. Their lighter bodies and flexible limbs gave them advantages no one could have predicted during the age of deserts. The first dinosaurs were quietly inheriting the earth, and above them all, the storms kept growing. Lightning storms stretched across continents. Cloud systems merged into planetary weather patterns unlike anything in modern history. The atmosphere had become a self-sustaining engine of moisture, constantly recycling water between overheated oceans and the flooded interior of Pangaea. Every rainfall cooled the surface slightly. That cooling pulled in more oceanic air. More oceanic air created more clouds. More clouds created more rain. The cycle fed itself endlessly. Some scientists believe the planet crossed a climatic tipping point during this period, a moment when Earth's atmosphere became physically incapable of returning to its previous dry equilibrium. The rain had become permanent, and somewhere deep in humanity's future, countless civilizations would remember stories of endless storms sent by gods descending from the heavens. The Sumerians would speak of the Anunnaki watching over a flooded world. Ancient flood myths would survive across continents, separated by oceans and thousands of years. Perhaps because somewhere in Earth's oldest memory, the planet itself once nearly drowned. Now the rivers of Pangaea were awakening, and soon the deserts would begin turning into oceans of mud. The rain no longer felt like weather. It felt permanent. Weeks passed, then months, then years. The skies above Pangaea remained locked beneath endless layers of black and gray cloud systems that stretched farther than any living creature could travel. Sunlight became weak and distant, filtering through the atmosphere in pale fragments that barely reached the surface. For the first time in millions of years, Earth was becoming a water world again. The transformation accelerated with terrifying speed. Ancient riverbeds exploded into violent torrents that carved through the deserts like open wounds. Valleys flooded. Entire plains disappeared beneath dark brown water loaded with mud, minerals, and decaying vegetation. The sound of moving water became constant. Everywhere, rivers crashing through canyons, rain hammering stone, thunder rolling endlessly above the clouds. Even sleep became impossible for many creatures. The planet itself had become loud. The atmosphere now carried so much moisture that fog formed almost everywhere. Dense walls of mist drifted across the flooded landscapes, reducing visibility to only a few meters. Predators could no longer hunt by sight alone. The world smelled different now, too. Rot, wet soil, decay. Massive quantities of plant material died under the relentless moisture and began decomposing at extraordinary speed. Entire forests collapsed into black swamps, where fungi spread like living blankets across drowned ecosystems. The oxygen-rich dry air of ancient Pangaea slowly transformed into a humid atmosphere heavy with spores, gases, and microscopic life. For the old rulers of the dry world, conditions became catastrophic. Many large reptiles simply could not adapt. Their massive bodies sank into softening ground. Creatures built for dry stone and hard desert surfaces now struggled to move through endless mud. Some starved because traditional migration routes vanished beneath floodwaters. Others drowned. Fossils discovered by paleontologists show entire groups of animals buried together during this period, trapped inside sudden mud flows or overwhelmed by rapidly rising water systems. But extinction rarely arrives alone. Where old species vanished, new ones expanded. Primitive forests spread rapidly across regions that had once been lifeless deserts. Giant ferns covered the floodplains. Early conifer forests emerged along river systems fed by constant rainfall. Life exploded outward. Insects multiplied in unimaginable numbers. The humid atmosphere became ideal for reproduction. Massive swarms filled the skies, while freshwater ecosystems expanded across nearly every continent. The world no longer belonged to desert survivors. It belonged to creatures that could thrive in moisture. And among them, the dinosaurs began rising faster than ever before. At this stage, they were still small compared to the giants they would eventually become. Most stood no taller than a human, but they possessed advantages the older reptiles lacked. Their bodies were lighter, their limbs more flexible, their metabolism more adaptable. They moved through mud efficiently while larger competitors became trapped. They reproduced faster. They spread rapidly through the new wet ecosystems forming across Pangaea. For millions of years, they had existed quietly in the shadows. Now the rain was giving them the planet. Some species evolved astonishingly quickly. Early carnivorous dinosaurs developed sharper senses for hunting through fog and darkness. Their hearing improved to detect movement beneath constant rainfall. Their eyes adapted to low-light environments beneath permanent cloud cover. Herbivorous species evolved specialized digestive systems capable of processing the new flood-grown vegetation spreading across the continents. Evolution itself accelerated. Earth had entered survival mode. Meanwhile, above the storms, the atmosphere continued changing. Volcanic eruptions in Rangelia never stopped. Even after centuries, enormous volcanic systems continued pumping greenhouse gases into the sky. Carbon dioxide concentrations climbed higher and higher, trapping more heat and forcing more ocean evaporation. The rain engine remained active. Scientists today believe this period may have lasted nearly 2 million years. 2 million years of storms. 2 million years without stable dry seasons. 2 million years of rivers reshaping continents. The landscapes of Earth became almost unrecognizable. Mountain ranges eroded rapidly beneath constant rainfall. Sediment poured into oceans, turning coastal waters dark with mud and minerals. Entire new lakes formed while others disappeared beneath expanding floodplains. The continents themselves seemed to melt. And in some regions, conditions became even stranger. Gigantic mud basins formed across low-lying areas of Pangaea. These were not ordinary swamps. They were oceans of liquid sediment, places where the ground itself behaved like water. Animals crossing these regions sometimes vanished completely, swallowed by soft earth beneath the endless rain. Fossils discovered from this period show creatures preserved in extraordinary detail because entire bodies became trapped inside oxygen-poor mud before decomposition could destroy them. The Earth was rewriting itself, layer by layer. Some researchers believe these unimaginable environmental shifts may explain why flood myths became nearly universal among later human civilizations. Stories separated by oceans and thousands of years all repeated similar themes. Gods descending from the heavens. The destruction of the old world through water. A chosen few surviving while civilizations disappeared beneath endless storms. The Mesopotamians called those celestial beings the Anunnaki. According to legend, they watched humanity before the Great Flood. Most historians consider the story symbolic, but symbols are often born from ancient memory. And Earth's geological memory still carries evidence that the planet once experienced a rainfall event so extreme it permanently altered the course of evolution. Now the skies above Pangaea had become permanent engines of chaos, and below them, something even worse was beginning inside the oceans themselves, because while the continents drowned beneath endless rain, the seas were slowly turning poisonous. While rain consumed the continents above, the oceans below were dying. At first, the transformation remained invisible from the surface. Waves still rolled across the coastlines of Pangaea. Marine reptiles still hunted through shallow tropical waters. Coral reefs still shimmered beneath the currents. But the chemistry of the seas had begun to change. And once oceans begin changing chemistry, entire worlds disappear. The endless volcanic eruptions of Rangelia continued flooding Earth's atmosphere with carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, chlorine, and toxic compounds. Rain carried those chemicals into rivers. Rivers carried them into the oceans. Slowly, the seas became more acidic. At first, the changes were subtle enough that marine life barely noticed, but certain organisms felt the difference immediately. Tiny plankton, primitive coral species, ammonoids with delicate spiral shells, all of them depended on stable ocean chemistry to survive, and stability no longer existed. The water itself had become hostile. Calcium carbonate, the material many sea creatures use to build shells and skeletons, began dissolving faster than organisms could replace it. Entire reefs weakened from within. Coral structures that had survived for millions of years suddenly turned brittle and fragile. Massive underwater ecosystems collapsed like ancient cities crumbling beneath the sea. And when the reefs died, everything connected to them began dying too. Fish populations crashed, predators starved, food chains shattered. Across the oceans of Earth, extinction spread silently through the water. The rain above made the process even worse. Gigantic rivers carried endless sediment from the flooded continents into coastal waters. Mud and minerals darkened the oceans, blocking sunlight from reaching marine plants and algae. Photosynthesis declined. Oxygen levels fell. And then came the dead zones, vast regions of ocean where oxygen disappeared almost completely. Modern oceans still contain small dead zones today, but during the Carnian Rain episode, some scientists believe they expanded across enormous portions of Earth's seas. Any creature unable to flee suffocated. Entire ecosystems vanished in silence beneath dark water. The seas became graveyards. And yet, even here, life adapted. Some organisms evolved rapidly to survive the poisoned oceans. Species with soft bodies gained advantages over shell-building creatures. Primitive ancestors of modern corals appeared during this period, better suited to acidic conditions. Evolution was selecting survivors for a completely different Earth. Meanwhile, on land, the rainfall intensified even further. The continents were now almost unrecognizable. Millions of years of dry sediment had become unstable beneath endless moisture. Entire landscapes liquefied. Mudslides the size of modern mountain ranges moved slowly across the surface of Pangaea. Valleys disappeared beneath thick oceans of sludge. Rivers constantly changed direction, carving new paths through weakened rock. Nothing remained stable. The ground itself became alive. Some regions transformed into vast mud oceans stretching to the horizon. Not lakes, not swamps. Entire seas made from liquid earth. Creatures attempting to cross them sometimes vanished forever. Paleontologists have discovered fossils from this period preserved in astonishing detail because animals became trapped suddenly beneath oxygen-poor sediment before decay could destroy their bodies. Some still contain skin impressions, muscle tissue outlines, even stomach contents. The mud preserved death perfectly. The skies remained permanently dark. For generations, many animals likely never experienced direct sunlight at all. Young creatures were born beneath storms, lived beneath storms, and died beneath storms without ever seeing a clear sky. The psychological effect on life itself must have been unimaginable. The world had forgotten what normal looked like. And through it all, the dinosaurs continued expanding. They spread along the floodplains and wet forests that now dominated the continents. Their adaptability gave them advantages in almost every transformed ecosystem. Some evolved longer legs for navigating unstable mud. Others developed stronger lungs for humid, low-oxygen air. Carnivorous species learned to hunt through dense fog and heavy rainfall using sound and vibration instead of sight. The age of reptiles had existed long before them. But now the age of dinosaurs was beginning. Not through conquest, not through sudden dominance, but because the rain destroyed the world, their competitors needed to survive. And perhaps that is how evolution truly works. Not by rewarding the strongest, but by rewarding the adaptable. Some ancient traditions would later describe catastrophic floods as divine cleansing events, moments when gods erased one world to create another. The Sumerians believed the Anunnaki once watched humanity from above before great destruction swept across the earth. Other cultures spoke of celestial beings bringing knowledge after floods reshaped civilization. Perhaps these stories survived because catastrophe leaves scars deeper than memory, because even today, hidden inside layers of ancient rock, Earth still carries evidence of a world where storms lasted longer than human civilization itself has existed. But the transformation was not finished. Far from it. The rain had already changed the climate, changed the continents, changed evolution. Now it was about to change the atmosphere itself, because after hundreds of thousands of years beneath endless storms, Earth was beginning to suffocate. For hundreds of thousands of years, the storms continued, not as isolated disasters, not as temporary climate shifts, but as the new normal of planet Earth. The atmosphere had become so overloaded with moisture that weather itself operated differently than anything humans have ever experienced. Storm systems no longer traveled across continents and disappeared. They merged. They fed each other. They became permanent planetary machines recycling water endlessly between ocean and sky. Earth was trapped inside its own hydrological engine. And now, after ages of uninterrupted rainfall, the consequences were reaching every layer of the biosphere. The air itself was beginning to change. The first signs appeared in the forests. The enormous wetlands spreading across Pangaea produced staggering amounts of organic decay. Dead vegetation accumulated faster than ecosystems could process it. Thick carpets of rotting plant matter covered floodplains, swamps, and mud basins, stretching across entire continents. Bacteria thrived. Fungi exploded in diversity. The atmosphere filled with spores. And as decomposition accelerated, oxygen levels fluctuated violently. Some regions became rich in oxygen due to explosive plant growth. Others turned dangerously depleted as decay consumed available oxygen faster than it could be replenished. Breathing itself became unpredictable. Animals migrating between regions sometimes entered atmospheric conditions their bodies simply could not tolerate. Some suffocated slowly. Others adapted. The dinosaurs adapted. Their respiratory systems were already more efficient than many competing reptiles. Air sac structures inside their bodies allowed oxygen to move through their lungs more effectively, giving them a massive advantage in unstable atmospheric conditions. While older species weakened, the dinosaurs expanded faster than ever. The wet forests of Pangaea now stretched for thousands of kilometers. Giant fern fields rose higher than many animals. Primitive conifers formed dense, humid jungles where visibility dropped to almost nothing beneath layers of vegetation and fog. The world no longer resembled a desert planet. It had become alien. Insects reached extraordinary sizes in some regions due to fluctuating oxygen concentrations. Swarms darkened entire valleys. Gigantic amphibians returned to ecosystems that had once been too dry for their survival. Water was everywhere now. Not clean water, not peaceful water, but dark, heavy, mineral-rich floodwater constantly reshaping the planet. Some regions experienced endless gentle rain. Others suffered catastrophic superstorms that lasted for months without interruption. Lightning became nearly constant in equatorial zones. Entire forests burned briefly during electrical storms before being extinguished again beneath overwhelming rainfall. The skies glowed at night. Continuous electrical activity illuminated cloud systems stretching across continents. To any observer standing on the surface, Earth would have looked alive, breathing, convulsing, transforming itself. And beneath those storms, ecosystems continued collapsing and rebuilding in rapid cycles. Entire species vanished within relatively short geological periods. Large desert-adapted reptiles disappeared from many regions entirely. Their eggs failed in saturated soil. Their skin infections spread uncontrollably in permanent humidity. Their hunting patterns no longer worked in dense forests and fog-filled floodplains. Predators that once ruled Pangaea became evolutionary ghosts. But extinction creates opportunity. The dinosaurs inherited abandoned ecosystems one after another. Small bipedal hunters evolved into faster and more intelligent forms. Herbivorous species diversified rapidly as new plant life spread across the flooded continents. For the first time, dinosaur populations began dominating entire regions instead of isolated ecological niches. The rain was creating rulers for a new Earth. Modern scientists often describe mass extinctions as destructive events, but in reality, extinctions are also evolutionary doorways. When one world dies, another immediately begins forming in its place, and few transformations in Earth's history were more complete than this one. Some theories suggest the Carnian Rain episode may have permanently reshaped atmospheric circulation patterns for tens of millions of years afterward. Even when the rains eventually weakened, the planet would never fully return to the dry equilibrium of early Triassic times. The old Earth was gone forever. Meanwhile, the oceans continued deteriorating. Massive algae blooms spread across coastal waters. Rivers carried nutrients from collapsing continents into the seas, feeding explosions of microscopic life that consumed enormous amounts of oxygen. Entire marine regions turned black beneath the surface. Dead zones expanded. Ancient marine reptiles fled toward more stable waters where possible. Others perished. The great reefs of the old world collapsed almost entirely. But strange new ecosystems began replacing them. Soft-bodied organisms thrived in acidic seas. Primitive modern coral ancestors slowly emerged. New evolutionary experiments unfolded everywhere at once. Earth had become a laboratory of survival, and somewhere in the distant future, long after these storms finally ended, humanity would inherit a planet shaped by this forgotten catastrophe. A world where dinosaurs rose because rain rewrote evolution itself. Yet some believe the memory of this ancient planetary trauma survived in another form, not through fossils, not through stone, but through myth. Ancient Mesopotamian texts described celestial beings descending from the heavens before a great flood transformed the earth. The Anunnaki. According to legend, they possessed knowledge passed down from worlds older than humanity itself. Some modern theorists believe flood myths appearing across nearly every human civilization may reflect inherited cultural memories of prehistoric climate catastrophes buried deep within collective consciousness. Not literal memories passed directly through time, but echoes, fragments, instinctive fears carried through generations of storytelling. Because water has always terrified humanity more than almost anything else. And perhaps, somewhere deep in our species, we still remember a world where the sky never stopped falling. But eventually, after nearly 2 million years, something extraordinary began happening above the clouds. For the first time in ages, the storms started weakening. For nearly 2 million years, Earth had existed beneath a ceiling of storms. Entire generations of life had been born into darkness, raised beneath endless rainfall, and died without ever seeing a truly clear sky. But eventually, the planet began fighting its way back toward balance. The change was almost impossible to notice at first. A slightly weaker storm season in one region. Longer pauses between rainfalls in another. subtle breaks in the cloud cover that lasted only minutes before disappearing again. Yet after millions of years of permanent instability, even the smallest atmospheric shift mattered. Deep beneath the oceans, the volcanic fury of Rangelia was finally slowing. The eruptions that had poisoned the atmosphere for ages no longer erupted with the same unstoppable violence. Lava flows became less frequent. Greenhouse gas emissions slowly declined. And as volcanic activity weakened, the atmosphere began changing once more. Carbon dioxide levels remained extremely high by modern standards, but the endless upward spiral had finally stopped. The climate engine driving the eternal storms was losing power. Gradually, Earth's weather systems began reorganizing themselves. Some regions of Pangaea still suffered massive rainfall and flooding, but others experienced something that had not existed for geological ages: dry intervals. At first they lasted only days, then weeks. Eventually, entire seasons emerged where rain weakened enough for sunlight to reach the surface again. The planet was relearning how to breathe, and what emerged from beneath those retreating storms was no longer the world that had existed before. The deserts of old Pangaea were gone. In their place stood immense forests, sprawling wetlands, giant river systems, and ecosystems overflowing with unfamiliar life. The atmosphere felt different now, cleaner in some regions, more oxygen-rich in others. The endless decay and explosive plant growth during the rainy ages had transformed Earth's chemistry permanently. And across these transformed landscapes, one group of creatures now dominated nearly everything: the dinosaurs. They were no longer small opportunists hiding in ecological shadows. Now they ruled entire continents. Some species had grown enormous, taking advantage of abundant vegetation and stable wet climates. Others evolved into terrifying predators capable of hunting across dense forests and floodplains. The extinction of their competitors had opened evolutionary pathways that no longer had barriers. Earth had become their planet. The age of dinosaurs had officially begun, and perhaps most remarkable of all, it happened because of rain, not an asteroid, not sudden annihilation, but a slow, relentless climate transformation that rewrote evolution over millions of years. The world itself had selected new rulers. Meanwhile, the oceans slowly stabilized as well. Acidification weakened. New coral systems evolved. Marine ecosystems rebuilt themselves around species capable of surviving the chemical chaos left behind by the storms. Life recovered. But recovery did not mean restoration. The ecosystems that emerged after the Carnian Rain episode were fundamentally different from the worlds that existed before it. Earth had crossed an irreversible boundary, and some scientists believe this forgotten climate catastrophe may have been one of the most important turning points in the entire history of complex life. Because without it, dinosaurs may never have dominated Earth. And without dinosaur dominance, mammals may never have evolved the way they eventually did. Which means humanity itself may owe its existence to 2 million years of rain. A terrifying thought. That one ancient climate shift may have indirectly shaped every human civilization, every city, every language, every person alive today. The storms ended, but their fingerprints remained inside evolution forever. And still, the mystery deepened. Because as humans eventually appeared millions of years later, stories emerged everywhere about floods sent from the heavens. Civilizations separated by oceans and continents somehow shared strangely similar memories. A drowned world. Gods descending from the sky. warnings ignored, survivors rebuilding civilization after water destroyed the old age. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki. The Babylonians preserved tales of divine beings connected to catastrophic floods. Ancient cultures from nearly every corner of Earth carried versions of the same terrifying idea, that the sky itself once turned against the world. Most scholars explain these myths as symbolic reflections of local disasters, river floods, tsunamis, seasonal catastrophes, and perhaps they are right. But perhaps myths survive because they touch something older, something buried deep inside human psychology, because humanity emerged on a planet shaped by ancient climate trauma. Our species evolved in the aftermath of worlds destroyed by environmental collapse over and over again. Maybe flood myths endure because Earth itself remembers, because the rocks remember, the fossils remember, and somewhere deep beneath our modern cities, highways, and civilizations, the geological scars of the Great Rain still remain hidden inside stone. Today, scientists continue discovering evidence of the Carnian Rain episode in ancient sediments across the world. Layers of mud, fossilized floodplains, chemical signatures trapped inside rock. Proof that Earth once experienced one of the strangest climate events in planetary history. A world where deserts drowned, oceans suffocated, dinosaurs rose, and the rain did not stop for 2 million years. But there is one final question, a question more unsettling than anything that came before. What if Earth is capable of doing it again? What if the greatest danger was never the rain itself, but the realization that Earth's climate can suddenly transform beyond anything life expects? For 2 million years, the planet existed inside a state that should not have been possible. Modern climate systems are built on balance. Oceans, atmosphere, sunlight, volcanic activity, and biological life constantly regulating one another like parts of a gigantic living machine. But during the Carnian Rain episode, that balance failed completely. And once it failed, Earth became almost unrecognizable. Today, when scientists examine ancient rock layers from this period, they find evidence of terrifying instability. Flood sediments thousands of meters thick, massive chemical shifts trapped inside minerals, fossils preserved in catastrophic mud flows, sudden extinctions, explosive evolutionary radiations. The geological record tells a story that sounds less like normal climate change and more like a planetary nervous breakdown. Yet perhaps the most unsettling part is how quickly it happened. In geological terms, the transition from dry supercontinent to drowned world occurred almost instantly, a few thousand years, perhaps even faster in some regions. For a planet over 4 billion years old, that is the equivalent of a heartbeat. And this raises a frightening possibility. Earth does not always change slowly. Sometimes it flips, suddenly, violently, irreversibly. The creatures living during the Middle Triassic could never have imagined that the stable dry world surrounding them was temporary. To them, the deserts must have seemed eternal, permanent, unshakable, and then the sky changed. That same illusion exists today. Modern civilization often assumes our climate system is stable because human history has unfolded during an unusually calm geological period. But Earth itself has never promised stability. In fact, instability may be the planet's natural state. The Carnian Rain episode proves that climate systems can cross thresholds where normal rules stop applying. And once those thresholds are crossed, feedback loops begin controlling the planet automatically. During the age of endless rain, warming oceans created more evaporation. More evaporation created more storms. More storms altered atmospheric chemistry, and altered chemistry trapped even more heat. The planet entered a self-reinforcing cycle that continued for nearly 2 million years. Some scientists warn that similar feedback systems still exist today. Melting ice changing ocean circulation, warming oceans releasing methane, forests collapsing and releasing carbon. The details are different, but the principle remains terrifyingly familiar. Earth is capable of changing faster than life expects, and life is often powerless once those transformations begin. Perhaps this is why flood myths appear so deeply rooted in human consciousness. Water represents chaos, the collapse of order, the destruction of stability itself. Ancient Mesopotamian civilizations believed the Anunnaki possessed knowledge about cycles of destruction and rebirth. According to some interpretations of the myths, these celestial beings understood that civilizations rise and fall according to forces far larger than humanity itself. Most historians reject literal interpretations of those stories. But metaphorically, the idea is difficult to ignore, because the history of Earth truly is a story of repeated collapse and renewal. Worlds ending, new worlds emerging, again and again. The Carnian Rain episode was not merely a disaster. It was a reset. The old rulers of Earth disappeared. New ones rose from the shadows. Evolution accelerated. The entire direction of life changed. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson hidden inside this ancient storm. Catastrophe does not simply destroy life, it reshapes it. Every forest alive today, every mammal, every bird, every human being exists partly because an ancient planet once drowned beneath endless rain. Without that transformation, dinosaurs may never have ruled Earth. Without dinosaurs, mammals may never have inherited the world after the asteroid impact millions of years later. And without mammals, there would be no human civilization asking questions beneath modern skies. In a strange way, humanity was born from catastrophe. The rain eventually stopped. The clouds finally broke apart. Sunlight returned to continents that had forgotten what blue skies looked like. But Earth never truly returned to what it had been before. Some scars remained forever, and perhaps they always will. Even now, buried beneath mountains and deserts, hidden inside ancient rock formations, the memory of that drowned world survives. Silent, waiting. Proof that the sky itself once became an unstoppable force, capable of reshaping all life on Earth. And maybe somewhere, deep beneath mythology and forgotten memory, humanity still carries echoes of that ancient fear. The fear that one day, the rain could return. When the storms finally weakened, Earth entered a strange silence. Not true silence. The planet would never be silent again after what it had endured. Rivers still thundered across continents reshaped by millions of years of erosion. Wet forests stretched endlessly across former deserts. The ocean still carried the chemical scars of ancient acidification. But compared to the age of endless storms, the world felt calm. For the first time in unimaginable ages, sunlight returned consistently to the surface. Blue sky reappeared above parts of Pangaea, and life emerged into that new sunlight transformed forever. The dinosaurs expanded rapidly across the recovering world. Some became apex predators. Others evolved into massive herbivores capable of feeding on the endless vegetation spreading through the humid landscapes. Entire ecosystems reorganized around them. The old dry world reptiles were mostly gone now. Earth had chosen new rulers. But while evolution rebuilt the surface, something else may have been forming far deeper in the story of life itself. Memory. Not conscious memory, not written history, but inherited fear. A species does not survive endless catastrophes without carrying traces of them forward somehow. Human beings would not evolve for another 200 million years after the Carnian Rain episode ended. Yet when humanity finally appeared, flood myths emerged almost everywhere on Earth. Mesopotamia, India, China, Mesoamerica, Greece, Africa, the Pacific Islands, civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years somehow told remarkably similar stories. The heavens darkened, the world drowned. A chosen few survived. Knowledge was preserved. And mysterious beings from the sky played a role in humanity's survival. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. According to ancient tablets, the Anunnaki descended from the heavens before a great flood destroyed civilization. Some stories describe them as teachers, others describe them as judges. Some legends even claimed they possessed knowledge of cyclical catastrophes capable of resetting the world itself. Most mainstream historians view these myths symbolically, and perhaps they are. But symbols often emerge from real fears, and no fear is older than the fear of the sky turning against us. Some modern theorists believe ancient flood myths may preserve fragmented cultural memories of prehistoric climate disasters passed from generation to generation through storytelling. Not direct memories of the Carnian Rain episode itself, of course. Humanity did not exist then, but perhaps echoes of smaller catastrophes shaped by the same planetary forces. Ice Age floods, rising seas, megastorms, volcanic winters. Human civilization has always lived under the shadow of environmental collapse. And maybe our ancestors instinctively understood something modern humanity often forgets. Nature is not stable. It only appears stable until it changes. The people who built the first civilizations likely believed their rivers, climates, and seasons would continue forever, just as the creatures of Triassic Pangaea once believed the deserts would never end. Then the rains came, and the world transformed. Today, scientists studying Earth's ancient climate systems have uncovered alarming evidence that rapid environmental tipping points are real. Ocean currents can weaken suddenly. Atmospheric systems can reorganize rapidly. Ice sheets can collapse faster than expected. Rainfall patterns can shift dramatically. Earth is not a machine built for permanence. It is a living system built for change, sometimes slow, sometimes catastrophic. And perhaps that is why the idea of divine beings warning humanity before floods appears repeatedly throughout history. The Anunnaki myths may not describe literal extraterrestrials descending from the sky, but symbolically, they represent something deeply human. The belief that knowledge might help us survive forces larger than ourselves. The ancient Sumerians understood how fragile civilization truly was. Their cities depended entirely on water systems they could not fully control. Too little rain meant famine. Too much meant annihilation. Water gave civilization life, and water could erase it. That truth has never changed. Even now, modern humanity builds cities beside oceans and rivers while assuming the climate surrounding us will remain familiar forever. But Earth's history tells a very different story. The planet has reinvented itself repeatedly, and every time it does, life must adapt or disappear. The Carnian Rain episode stands as one of the greatest examples of that truth. 2 million years of storms, entire ecosystems erased, dinosaurs rising from obscurity to dominance, the atmosphere transformed, the oceans poisoned, the continents reshaped, all because Earth crossed a climatic threshold from which there was no quick return. And perhaps the most unsettling realization of all is this: to the creatures living through the beginning of that catastrophe, the first storms probably did not seem important, just unusual weather, just temporary change. Until suddenly, the world they knew no longer existed. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff at the end of the world, not the end of Earth itself, but the end of an entire version of reality. That is what the Carnian Rain episode truly was. A planetary transition so vast that almost no trace of the old world survived except fragments buried deep beneath stone. By the time the endless rains finally faded, Earth had become something entirely different from the dry supercontinent that existed before the storms began. The deserts of ancient Pangaea were gone. The ecosystems that had dominated the planet for millions of years had vanished almost completely, and in their place stood a transformed Earth covered in forests, river systems, wetlands, and rapidly evolving life. The dinosaurs now ruled the continents, not because they were originally the strongest, not because they conquered the world through sudden violence, but because they survived a climate catastrophe that destroyed nearly everything around them. That is how fragile dominance truly is in nature. The rulers of one age become fossils in the next. And perhaps nowhere is that lesson clearer than in the forgotten story of the 2 million-year reign. Even today, the evidence remains hidden across the planet. Ancient flood sediments, sudden fossil transitions, chemical anomalies trapped inside rocks older than the first mammals. Scientists continue piecing together the story layer by layer, discovering how close Earth once came to becoming almost unrecognizable. And yet most people have never heard of it. We speak often about asteroid impacts, ice ages, mass extinctions, but few realize that one of the most important turning points in Earth's history came not from fire falling from the sky, but from water, endless water. Perhaps that is why flood myths became so powerful across human civilization. Water does not merely destroy, it erases boundaries, it reshapes landscapes, it dissolves certainty itself. The ancient Sumerians believed the Anunnaki understood the cycles of destruction that govern worlds and civilizations. According to legend, they possessed knowledge passed down from ages long forgotten. Whether those stories were symbolic, spiritual, or something else entirely may never be known. But one thing is certain. Humanity has always sensed that nature operates on scales far beyond human control. The people who built the first temples beneath Mesopotamian skies already feared the flood. The Greeks feared it. The Egyptians feared it. Nearly every civilization remembered some version of a drowned world. Perhaps because deep inside us we recognize a terrifying truth. Civilization is temporary. The climate that supports us is temporary. Even the shape of the Earth itself is temporary. The Carnian Rain episode reminds us that stability is often an illusion measured only against the short span of human memory. For millions of years, Pangaea's deserts appeared eternal. Then the atmosphere shifted, and the impossible became reality. Clouds covered the world. Rain fell without end. The oceans changed chemistry. The continents melted into mud. The old rulers vanished, and life began again. Tonight, as rain falls somewhere outside your window, or perhaps as calm skies stretch above your home. It is worth remembering that Earth has transformed itself many times before. Worlds have ended here. New worlds have emerged, again and again. The rocks beneath our feet are not silent. They are records of forgotten catastrophes, of drowned continents, of skies that once remained black for generations, of creatures that watched their world disappear beneath endless storms. And perhaps the strangest part of all is this. If humanity had existed during the beginning of the Carnian Rain episode, we may never have recognized the danger in time. The first storms would have seemed temporary, the first floods survivable, the first climate shifts explainable, until eventually, generation by generation, the old world vanished completely, not through one sudden apocalypse, but through slow, unstoppable transformation. That may be the true horror hidden inside Earth's ancient history. Not that catastrophe arrives suddenly, but that sometimes it arrives so gradually that life adapts while the world disappears around it. And somewhere inside ancient myths about floods, gods, and the Anunnaki, perhaps humanity has always tried to warn itself about that possibility. The rain eventually stopped, but the Earth that emerged afterward was no longer the same planet, and neither would we be.